Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to officially start by welcoming you. Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap. Welcome to everyone here, and welcome to everyone who's joining us online. This is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the original words of the Buddha. I'll explain to you guys what that is after we do some meditation, because I start class with meditation. So if you'd like to join for meditation, the way that I do meditation is I start with some chanting, and these chants, they're on a laminated sheet over there on the table. You're welcome to see the chants if you like. We chant in the Pali language, which is the original source language of the teachings of the Buddha. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they used chanting as a way to commit the teachings to memory, but nowadays we don't need to chant in order to commit the teachings to memory. We basically chant in order to ease the mind into meditation and actually get more benefit out of the meditation itself. These chants, they're not a rite or ritual or ceremony or worship. It's not prayer or anything like this. There's nothing mystical or magical with these chants. It's just a way to ease the mind into meditation and get more benefit out of the meditation itself. I suspect the Buddha didn't actually create these chants because you'll see a lot of admiration, respect, and gratitude for the Buddha in these chants. So a Buddha doesn't walk around teaching his students to chant to him. But if you learn from a teacher how to go from anger and sadness and frustration and all these other discontent feelings and moving your mind to enlightenment, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, never again experiencing any more anger or sadness or any of those other discontent feelings, you'd probably have a lot of respect for that person too. The Buddha didn't want anything from his students. He didn't ask anything from his students. He didn't expect anything from his students. He just basically helped them to understand what it took for him to get to that enlightened mental state so that they could experience it for themselves. So I suspect his students created these chants either during his life or after his death. So I'm going to ease us into meditation with these chants, and you guys are welcome to join along if you like to chant. Then after the chant, I'm going to give some guidance. You'll see that as we're meditating, I'll be giving you some guidance and kind of helping you along with your meditation. But then there'll be a period of time where it'll just be quiet. I won't be giving you any guidance at all. We'll just be meditating. I'm sure you'll hear the occasional dog bark or maybe a bird chirping or a car going by or something like this. But nonetheless, you'll see that the quietness isn't permanent. It's not possible to have permanent quietness. And then after we do that quiet period of meditation, then we'll come out of meditation with some more chanting. So the way that we meditate is there's 4 different positions. There's seated, lying, standing, and walking position. And usually when students are first learning, they're learning in the seated position because this is really accessible to them, either sitting on a floor or sitting in a chair. You can really sit however you like. But these other positions are available too because you're going to need them at different times depending on what's going on with the body. But if you're sitting on the floor, usually you sit with your legs lightly crossed rather than like real tight, because that would inhibit the circulation and you'd like things to be able to flow. You're not interested in having any pain in the lower body or any aspect of the body. Some people like to put their legs off the mat because this gets the hips up in the air and it lessens the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles and allows things to flow a bit. And then the hands and the arms. The Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. If this is comfortable for you, you could use it, but it's not about everybody doing it exactly the same way because this isn't possible. Everybody's going to find things slightly different that feel comfortable for them. So some people prefer to put their palms on their thighs or their knees or their palms up. Some people just rest their hands comfortably in their lap. So you just find whatever's comfortable for you. And if at any point you feel like you'd like to use a chair, we have chairs. So people that sit in chairs, they usually put their feet flat on the floor or lightly crossed at the ankles. With essentially the lower body and the hands and arms should be completely relaxed and comfortable. The upper body should be erect. This keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation. It also helps you to breathe into the nose and out of the nose, because if your sternum's up and your shoulders are back, you'll be able to experience nice full breaths as you breathe in and you breathe out. So again, I'm going to start us with some chanting, and then I'll be back with some guidance to help you guys understand the meditation. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakeva Wat Tung Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Dhammo Namang namasami. Supatipano bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho saṅghang namami. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vicacaranang sammuno sakato rokavito anutero purisa namasati satatawa manusanang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, in the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled. Just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. สัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังมหากัมวันตังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหากัมวัตตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามิ นับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวาปานุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, I will once again welcome all of you guys, those of you guys here at the temple, those of you guys that are online, those that joined us since we started meditating. Welcome to all of you guys. For those of you guys that are here at the temple, if this is your first time that you've been here, I'd just like to let you know that in the back of the room, the very last door on the right is a bathroom. You're welcome to use that as you like. You can feel free to come and go as you please. We even have bathrooms outside the classroom. If you go outside the classroom and follow the signs around, there's a main temple bathroom where you can go over there and use that bathroom too if you like, if this one's occupied. And then we even have water here that is provided by our students, which you're welcome to help yourself to any water that you like. So this is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the original teachings of the Buddha using his own words. There's other programs that I teach that are more foundational programs. Like tomorrow we're actually going to be restarting what's called the group learning program from the very beginning. This program on Sunday and Wednesday, it's a 7-month program where I gradually walk students through this first book of the book series. It's called Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This helps you build a really nice foundation and understanding what enlightenment is and how to actually progress towards enlightenment. And students will typically take a program like that first before they come into the Pali Canon and English study group. We even have various courses and retreats throughout the month, throughout the year, that students will oftentimes be building up their foundational understanding of the teachings of the Buddha, and then they'll come into the Pali Canon and English study group to be able to learn with the original words of the Buddha. Everything that I teach is based on the original words of the Buddha, and anybody who comes into any of the classes, you'll be able to learn and understand and be able to move along in understanding your journey to enlightenment. But just understand that the way that I'm going to teach today, it's not a typical way that I actually will teach, because I usually teach in a more traditional way where I'm kind of teaching for 15, 20, 30 minutes and then opening up for questions, and then another 15, 20, 30 minutes opening up for questions. This is more of a study group. What I do is I have the original words of the Buddha here, and we're actually studying volumes 2 through 13 in this program. It's a 1.5-year program. We're in volume 11, and we're studying chapters 121 through 130. And what I do is I ask for volunteers here at the temple, or anybody who's in Zoom, if you would like to read this particular chapter, which you can see here is just 2 paragraphs or 2 sentences essentially. And then after you read that particular chapter, I will share about 5 minutes or so, usually some teachings on that, and then I will open up to any questions that you guys have here at the temple, or those of you guys online. You guys can all ask questions. So if there's somebody that would like to volunteer to read this, I'll pause in a moment and just see if somebody would like to read. We have microphones here at the temple in that white bowl. If you press the gray button on the front, the light comes on. You just wait a couple of seconds and you hold this up to your chin, and then we'll be able to hear you here at the temple, and they'll be able to hear you online as well. And for those of you guys in Zoom, if you would like to read the chapters, you can just electronically raise your hand, and I'll be able to see that and call on you. You'll be able to read the chapter. We'll be able to hear you here at the temple, and they'll also be able to hear you online. And for anybody who would like to ask questions, if you're online, you can ask questions through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom by putting that into the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand. And then those of you guys here, if you'd like to ask questions, if you could also use the microphones, that way they'll be able to hear you online, and we'll be able to hear you here as well. So is there anyone who would like to read this first chapter? So one of the things, you got it, Koshi? Okay. I was going to say, one of the things that the unenlightened mind has is it has what we call personal existence view. This is one of the pollutions that the Buddha discovered, that the mind is clinging to a certain self-image and a certain self-identity, and it wants to be perceived in the world in a certain way. And oftentimes this will produce shyness, where an individual is kind of shy or hesitant to do any kind of public speaking or talk in the public, because the mind wants to be perceived in a certain way. And one of the ways that you break through that is you actually put the mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in. Typically what the unenlightened mind does is it thinks the way to solve its problems is push something away, and it thinks that's going to solve the problem. But what's actually causing this is the craving, desire, attachment in the mind is causing the shyness. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, there's no anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety. There's no loneliness or boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. There are certain causes and conditions in the mind that are causing these feelings to arise. So the teachings of the Buddha, he's not explaining to you the way the world should be, and if everybody does those things or follows those rules, then the world will become peaceful. He didn't do that. He didn't teach you a bunch of beliefs that if you believe a bunch of things, then something good will happen when you die. Instead, he's teaching you the way the world is. And by understanding the way the world is and the way that your mind functions, you can actually awaken to these natural laws, and you can get to the point where you've trained your mind where you no longer experience any of these discontent feelings. The mind can be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy permanently for the rest of this life. So just share that with you, so that if you feel like you're a bit shy and you're not interested in reading, maybe you can have some extra motivation to put your mind in the situation that it doesn't want to be in, and then you'll see that nothing's going to hurt you. And then slowly but surely you can let go of some of this personal existence view where the mind wants to be perceived in the world a certain way. So essentially you can move closer to enlightenment by choosing to read publicly, like Kushi's going to do, and then this will help you to get rid of this personal existence view and this shyness. Go ahead, Kushi.
Nibbana, the destruction of the taints. Venerable Sir, it is said the removal of craving, the removal of anger, the removal of ignorance, a knowing of true reality. Of what now, Venerable Sir, is this the designation? This, monks, is a designation for the element of Nibbana, enlightenment. the removal of craving, the removal of anger, the removal of ignorance, a knowing of true reality. The destruction of the taints is spoken of in that way.
Okay, this is a very short little discourse from the Buddha, just something that he's responding to a question here from one of his students, where he's referring to what's called the three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, or the three fires. Essentially what the Buddha did is he discovered these individual pollutions that are in the mind, and he figured out how to eradicate them and eliminate them to be able to get to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. In detail, we refer to these as the 10 fetters. They're called the 10 fetters because during ancient times, they would put a shackle and a chain and a ball around your ankle, and this is what would keep you confined to a certain area. So that's a fetter. They would attach a fetter to your leg. So these 10 fetters, or these 10 pollutions, are keeping the mind trapped in this unenlightened state, where it keeps experiencing anger and sadness and frustration and all these other discontent feelings over and over and over again. So part of your journey to enlightenment is to eradicate these 10 fetters so that you can experience the peace and the joy and the liberation of mind, where you don't have these strong feelings of anger, sadness, frustration, and all these other discontent feelings. These 10 fetters, they bubble up to what's called the three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, or the three fires. That's craving, anger, and ignorance. In all the teachings of the Buddha, you can independently verify them. It's not about, believing a bunch of things and hoping something good happens when you die. You're learning teachings, you're investigating them, you're examining them, you're reflecting on them to independently verify whether they're true or they're false. And then you're practicing them in order to train your mind. And as you're uprooting these pollutions out of the mind, you'll see more and more that the mind is experiencing peace and joy. So as your mind is being transformed, you're eliminating these poisons, or these pollutions, or these unwholesome roots. What craving is the longing, the yearning, the chasing after your selfish desires, wanting things to be a certain way. So if the mind gets what it wants, it gets pleasant feelings. It gets happy, excited, elated, thrill, euphoria. But those feelings are only temporary because they're based on some condition. So like, for example, if it's sunny outside, you might be happy. But then the problem is that when your cravings aren't getting fulfilled, your mind moves to the painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and others. So if your mind gets what it wants, it gets happy, excited. But if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, and others. And even when it gets happy, that happiness is impermanent. It's temporary because it's based on some condition. So if you base your happiness on some condition, like it's sunny outside, the sun is impermanent. It's not permanent. So that means your happiness is impermanent. Or if you base your inner feelings of happiness on your bank account, well, your bank account's impermanent too. Or if you base your inner feelings of happiness on your relationships, well, your relationships are impermanent too. So your happiness is impermanent. It's only a matter of time before you end up in the sadness, anger, and frustration. So part of what you're doing on this path, a big part, is you're eliminating your cravings, your desires, your attachments, your longing, your yearning, your chasing after things. Where instead of chasing your wants and your expectations, you pursue things as a goal, as an objective, or an interest. And this is where the mind can be peaceful and joyful. Because as long as the mind is craving and longing and yearning, it can only be happy if these conditions are met, which means your happiness becomes less and less and less as you take on more and more and more expectations and more cravings. And then, like I mentioned, if your cravings aren't being fulfilled, your mind moves to this anger, which is the second poison, or the second unwholesome root. The anger, the bitterness, the hostility, the aggression. When the mind experiences painful feelings, it's usually uncomfortable with those painful feelings, so it will tend to push a person away out of your life, or you might push the situation out of your life, thinking that that's going to solve the problem, but it doesn't. What's happening is the mind is misunderstanding what the real problem is and the cause of that problem. In the unenlightened mind, the mind thinks that the problem you're experiencing, the anger and the hostility and the bitterness, or any other painful feeling, the sadness, the mind thinks that it's being caused by somebody external. Mom is making me angry. Dad is making me angry. life partner is making me angry, children are making me angry, that pollution is frustrating me, or whatever, right? There's a lot of pollution in Chiang Mai right now. Somebody might think that the pollution is annoying them, but it's actually not. It's the craving, desire, attachment. It's the longing, the yearning, the wanting things to be a certain way. And the mind can only be happy when it gets things that way. And when it doesn't get things that way, that's when the painful feelings come in. And when the painful feelings are arising, the unenlightened mind falsely attributes those to something external, like this person or this situation. So it will tend to push people away or push a situation away. This is called aversion. And you know that doesn't solve the problem because you just get irritated or annoyed or frustrated about something else. It's only a matter of time. So when you push people away, you're not actually solving the problem because that's not the real problem. Or the second thing you might do when this anger is arising is you might be bitter, harsh, and hostile towards people in your intentions, your speech, and your actions. And now people experience that harshness and bitterness, and they choose to maybe leave out of your life because they're not comfortable with that. Or the third thing that the mind will do when it's misunderstanding that the problem is craving, and the cause of that problem is craving, is that it will put its expectations on people. It will try to control people to do things your way. So as long as you're pushing people away, or you're pushing a situation away, as long as you're being bitter, harsh, and hostile towards people, or as long as you're putting your expectations on people, you can't live harmoniously with all beings. Because as your expectations grow, the number of people you can spend time with becomes fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. Because it's only a matter of time before somebody does something you disagree with, and then you either push them away, you're bitter, harsh, and hostile, or you put your expectations on people. So this is that second poison of anger. And where all this is coming from is this third one, this ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality. The word ignorance is kind of a derogatory word nowadays. People are translating what the Buddha said to this word ignorance, but a Buddha or an enlightened being wouldn't use a word that's talking down and derogatory and degrading towards other people. Some other phrases you can use are things like the unknowing of true reality, or the lack of wisdom, or confusion or misunderstanding. The unenlightened mind has misunderstanding, it has confusion, it has a lack of wisdom. It doesn't understand that your mind is causing your own discontent feelings. Your mind is causing your own anger, your own frustration, your own irritation, all those discontent feelings, even the guilt, the shame, the fear, the stress, the anxiety. The mind is causing all those feelings itself. But the unenlightened mind lacks the wisdom to understand that that's the case. And because of the lack of wisdom, that's why the mind's pushing people away, being bitter, harsh, and hostile, and then putting your expectations on people. So this ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality, is the reason why craving and anger continues to exist. So even though we call it craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality, it's really because of the unknowing of true reality, or the ignorance, that craving and anger continues to exist. So this path to enlightenment is to purify the mind of craving, anger, and ignorance. And when you purify your mind of craving, anger, and ignorance, you can move to generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, which are the wholesome roots. As long as you make decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance, which is what the unenlightened mind's doing, you'll experience unwholesome results in your life, because these unwholesome roots produce unwholesome results. The craving is those selfish desires. So when you're making decisions that are based in your own self-interest and you're only out for yourself, it'll produce unwholesome results. Or if you make decisions based in anger, it's going to produce unwholesome results. Or if you make decisions based in ignorance, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. So you're transforming the mind as part of the path to enlightenment, and you're using various tools and techniques that the Buddha taught in order to eliminate the craving, anger, and ignorance from the mind and arise the wholesome roots, which are just the opposites of craving, anger, and ignorance. The wholesome roots are generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. Because generosity is giving and sharing more than is strictly required in any given situation without any expectation of anything in return. You might decide to share your time, your effort, your energy, your resources with others. Because when there's craving in the mind's going to hold on. It's going to become selfish, and you're going to be hindered from sharing. You're not going to be interested in sharing. The Buddha calls this the stain of selfishness, that the mind is stained with this selfishness. So you can practice generosity, where you live open-handedly and you're willing to give and share with others. The opposite of anger and this bitterness and this hostility is loving kindness. What loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. This is active goodwill towards other beings. And you can practice that through your intention, speech, and actions. When you learn the core teachings of the Buddha, he provides you tools and techniques to cultivate this loving kindness in your mind, and then to be able to practice it through your intentions, your speech, and your actions. And then what you're doing in order to antidote this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality is to cultivate wisdom. That's why nothing in the teachings of the Buddha is based in belief. Because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing something because somebody maybe convinced you to believe it, or you convinced yourself to believe it. But the teachings of the Buddha are about getting to wisdom, that you can see the truth for yourself, where you learn something, you investigate it, you examine it, then you reflect on it to independently verify whether it's true or whether it's false. As I'm speaking to you, you might be thinking about some situations that you've had where what I'm talking about is describing what it is that you're experiencing, so you know that you're learning the truth. And then you practice the teachings. You implement the tools and the techniques that the Buddha taught. And this is what transforms your mind away from these unwholesome roots of craving, anger, and ignorance, and arises the wholesome roots of generosity, loving kindness, and this wisdom, where now you know the truth. And you can make decisions based in wisdom and knowing the truth, which will now produce wholesome results in your life. Because as long as you lack wisdom, you're going to naturally make unwise decisions that produces unwholesome results. So do you guys have any questions on this particular teaching that the Buddha shares? I'll just remind you guys online that you guys can ask questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section. Or those of you guys in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. Oh, let me check our Facebook and YouTube. Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So these books, by the way, this is volume 11. There's an entire book series here, 13 books. You can actually get it for free on our website. If you go to buddhadailywisdom.com, you can download all these books in PDF format and learn them and read them through that. Or you can take them and go print them if you like. Or you can get printed versions here at the temple by just reimbursing us for our printing cost. Or you can get them on Amazon if you have access to Amazon. So it's available for you at no cost. Volumes 2 through 13, which we use for this particular program, they have the words of the Buddha like this, which you're seeing. Then it has a reference here. This reference will take you back to the original source teachings of the Buddha, because the original source teachings of the Buddha are in 45 volumes of books that are like this thick. So this little excerpt here shows up in the Pali Canon in this particular location. And then what you have in these books is you have words from me as well to help you reflect on that particular thing. In some cases, I'm teaching a lot more in the book than I can in classes. And sometimes in the class, I'm teaching more than that's in the book. So the combination between the book and the classes, you can fully get informed about what it is that the Buddha taught. And you have access to these to be able to learn and practice. Okay, so this is chapter 122. Is there someone either in Zoom or here at the temple that would like to read this? Yes, sir. Not yet.
Hello. Okay.
No, it's working.
The destruction of craving is nibbana, enlightenment. Venerable Sir, it is said, a being. In what way, Venerable Sir, is one called a being? One is stuck, Radha, tightly stuck, in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for form. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck, in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for feelings. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck, in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for perceptions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck, in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for volitional formations, choices, decisions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck, in desire, longing, excitement, craving for consciousness. Therefore, one is called a being. Suppose, Radha, some little boys or girls are playing with sand castles. So long as they are not free of desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sand castles, they cherish them, play with them, treasure them, and treat them possessively. But when those little boys or girls lose their desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sand castles, then they scatter them with their hands and feet, demolish them, shatter them, and put them out of play. So too, Radha, scatter form, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play. Practice for the destruction of craving. Scatter feeling, scatter perception, scatter volitional formations, choices, decisions. Scatter consciousness, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play. Practice for the destruction of craving. For the destruction of craving, Radha, is Nibbana, enlightenment.
Okay, thank you, sir. So what the Buddha is referring to here is what's called the five aggregates. Oh, I don't have it in this particular thing. I'll explain to you guys what the five aggregates are, because the Buddha teaches not to cling to these five aggregates. The five aggregates, we also refer to them as five collections or five elements. These are the five things that determine that a being is a living being. You have all five of these aggregates, five elements or five collections, and your mind can cling to these things, and you'll experience discontentedness when your mind is clinging to these things. Discontentedness meaning anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. What the five aggregates are describing five things that every living being is going to have. The first aggregate is called form. This means you have physical form, and you can see, you can reflect for yourself. Don't believe what I share. You can reflect and you can see, yes, you have physical form. The second thing is feelings. These are pleasant feelings, painful feelings, feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. And you know that you have all those feelings. Then there's the third aggregate, which is perceptions. What a perception is your views and opinions about the world. When you look out at the world, you have certain views and certain opinions. And some of those views and opinions are actually false views and false opinions because the mind's clinging to these perceptions. Another way to think about a perception is an assumption. The mind assumes certain things about the world around you. The fourth aggregate is called volitional formations. This is choices and decisions. You make certain choices and decisions. This is an aggregate that you have, or a collection or an element. And then the fifth one is called the consciousness. This is the mind itself. So every living being is going to have form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then a consciousness. And you can determine a living being from that. So you can take every living being, whether it's a human being, whether it's a dog, a monkey, a squirrel, a cat, you can see that they have all five aggregates. And you can independently reflect on this, that this definition that the Buddha shared over 2,500 years ago has held up to today, that it describes every living being. And then you can take an item that you know is not a living being, like this chair that I'm sitting in. You know that this is not a living being. So you can ask yourself, does it have physical form? Well, yeah, it has physical form. Does it have feelings? No, it doesn't have feelings, right? Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Kind of assumptions? No, it doesn't have those. Does it have choices and decisions? Does it have volitional formations? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street, put itself down? Can't do that. And does it have a consciousness or a mind? No, it doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. So you know that this is not a living being. And this is important for you because there are certain teachings that the Buddha describes where you don't cause harm to other beings, right? Where if you killed another being, there's going to be beings that are interested in killing you. and injuring you. So you're going to need to make wise decisions about how you interact with living beings, that you don't cause harm to other beings. So knowing what a being is very important, so that you're not causing harm to other beings, that you're living with loving kindness and compassion towards other beings. So your mind can cling to these things, and it will cause you discontentedness. That's what the Buddha is saying here. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, craving for form. What he's talking about is your mind is longing, yearning to hold on to this physical form, wanting it to be permanent. This is why when you're youthful, you might feel a certain way, but then when you start seeing wrinkles, or you start seeing gray hairs, or you see a pimple, or you see a mole, or you get a little bit of extra fat here or there, you start losing your hair or something like this, you might be shaken up by that, right? Because you're not getting what you want. The mind is clinging to this physical form. Or say you stump your toe, right? And you start experiencing this pain sensation in your toe. You might start getting frustrated and agitated or annoyed. This is because the mind's craving and clinging and holding on to this physical form, wanting it to permanently be a certain way, when it's not possible, because you live in an impermanent world. And then the same thing is true about the feelings. The mind will cling to these feelings, particularly those pleasant feelings. The mind will cling to that happiness, excitement, wanting it to be permanent. But it's a conditioned feeling, so it's not permanent. So as long as you're clinging to this pleasant feeling of happiness, eventually it's going to leave you, and then you're going to end up in the painful feelings like sadness, anger, and frustration. Or your perceptions. If you've ever been in an argument before, trying to convince someone that your views and opinions are true and accurate, and everyone else's are wrong and yours are all right, that's because you're clinging to your perceptions, wanting other people to know the same things that you know. You have certain views and opinions about the world, and if you're clinging to those, you might advocate for those and adamantly argue with other people because you're clinging to those perceptions. Or you might have made a certain assumption about something, and then you later found out that you were wrong about this assumption. Police officers are trained this way, that when they go into an environment, not to cling to their perceptions. Because if you were a police officer and you got a call over the radio that there's some store that's being robbed, and you made your way to the store, and when you walked in, you saw somebody in a black hoodie standing over top of somebody else with a gun, and the person is on the floor bleeding out. If you clung to your perception, you might just walk in and start shooting the guy that has the black hoodie and holding the gun. But you might have actually just shot an innocent person, because that might be the store clerk, and the person on the floor could be the robber. They might have gotten the gun out of the person's hand, and they might have shot the robber. So that's why police officers are trained when they come into a scene, that they don't know anything about what's happened at that scene, and they need to start asking questions. So right away, a police officer is going to come in, draw their gun, and they're going to say, "Put your gun down, police." Right? And if it's an innocent person, they're going to put their gun down because they see the police officer, and right away they're going to put their gun down because, all right, I'm safe. There's a police officer here. But if it's somebody who's meaning to do harm, they're going to turn and see the police officer, and they're probably going to point their gun at the police officer and maybe try to shoot the person, right? So a police officer, if they cling to their perceptions and they just walked in and started shooting the person in the black hoodie, they could have just shot an innocent person, and now they're going to jail for the rest of their life, because they clung to their perceptions, right? This is how crucial it is to ensure that you're not clinging to your perceptions about the world. And then there are certain choices or decisions. These are the volitional formations here. This is what the Buddha is talking about, that a living being has volitional formations. If you cling to your choices and decisions, you'll experience discontentedness. Let's say that you're on your way to Thailand, or you're on your way to Australia, and you really excited about this trip. Right? You've booked it out maybe 3 or 6 months ahead of time, and you're so excited. That's what the Buddha is talking about. Conditional excitement. Based on the condition of traveling to Australia or traveling to Thailand, you're so excited, and now you're clinging to this decision. You're really wanting to go. But now when you show up to the airport, your flight's canceled. Maybe the airline's on strike, and now the flight's canceled. You're going to be angry. You're going to be frustrated because you're experiencing impermanence. that these flights are not permanent. You can't permanently leave on a scheduled flight that's always going to be on time. It's just not possible. Due to impermanence, some flights are going to be on time, some flights are not going to be on time. Some flights are going to be canceled and not go at all. Some flights are going to crash, right? They're going to crash and have an accident, and people are going to die. This is the impermanent nature of the world. If you cling to your decision about going to Australia or going to Thailand, you'll be frustrated and angry. So you can train your mind to make decisions, but not cling to them and not hold on to them, understanding that they're not permanent, that you're going to need to sometimes change your decisions based on the impermanent nature of the world. And then the fifth aggregate is the consciousness. This is the mind itself. This is how the mind clings to its self-identity. There's a certain self-identity that your mind might have, like I am American, or I am Chinese, or I am Indian, or I am Lithuanian, or I am Brazilian, or I am Japanese, any number of different nationality, your culture, your ethnicity, maybe your sexual orientation, maybe your job or occupation. Your mind will cling to this identity, thinking that this is who you are. And now if somebody's complimentary to you, and they say maybe all Chinese people are so friendly and loving and kind, or all Americans are so loving and friendly and kind. But then it's only a matter of time before somebody says something negative and degrading or disparaging about something that your mind's clinging to as your identity. So if you were sitting at a table at a restaurant and two tables over, somebody was degrading people from the country that you come from, and you identify with I am Chinese, or I am American, or I am Indian, and now you hear that, you'll get frustrated, you'll get angry, you'll get irritated. So the Buddha teaches you to not cling to these aggregates, because if you cling to the form, the feelings, the perceptions, the volitional formations, or the consciousness, these things are all impermanent. They're constantly changing. And if you cling to them, wanting them to be permanent, when they change, your mind's going to experience discontentedness. So the Buddha is explaining how the mind is stuck in this desire, this longing, this conditional excitement. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're happy. You're happy all the time. In the unenlightened state, you can only be happy and excited if certain conditions are met. That's what the Buddha is talking about here with excitement. It's conditional excitement. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is experiencing unconditioned joy, where it's just always joyful, all the time, because you've eliminated your craving and clinging to all of these five aggregates. You're no longer craving existence, continuing to hold on and hold on and hold on. If you crave existence, if you're holding on to these five aggregates, when you get close to death, it'll be very painful death for you, because your mind wants to exist in this world, but yet this body is dying and you can't live in this world. So you can train your mind to let go of this, where you make wise decisions and you're working towards certain goals and objectives, and therefore you won't experience the painful feelings as a result of holding on to these things. And the Buddha is explaining that through this little analogy. He's saying, okay, when boys and girls are playing with sandcastles, as long as they have this desire and longing and excitement, this thirst, this passion, this craving for the sandcastles, and they play, they're going to experience this discontentedness. But those little boys and girls, when they lose their desire, their longing, yearning, excitement, they demolish and scatter them, put them out of play. What he's saying is like, get rid of them. It's like, oh, okay, we had fun with the sandcastle, let it go, right? And if you ever played in the sand on the beach, you understand what the Buddha's talking about, because you initially start playing with the sandcastle, making it all nice, but then eventually you might destroy it. Right? You're like, all right, whatever, I'm done with that. Right? And that's what the Buddha is saying with these five aggregates, is to let them go. Don't hold on to them. Don't cling to them. Scatter. Let them go. That's what he's talking about. Because it's the destruction of craving that leads to enlightenment. Because as long as your mind is craving and longing and yearning, you can't experience enlightenment. What enlightenment is where the mind's peaceful and joyful permanently at all times. You remove even the slightest condition that's causing a bad mood. You're not even in a bad mood anymore. But as long as you have craving in your mind, you'll see things as agreeable and you'll see things as disagreeable. And when you get what you want, you'll get excited. And when you don't get what you want, you'll get sad or frustrated or irritated or some other discontent feeling. So when you eliminate craving, your mind is now unconditioned, that you can be peaceful and joyful all the time. You can be happy all the time. So this is a significant part of the work on the path to enlightenment, is to eliminate the craving, desire, attachment, moving the mind to this enlightened mental state. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is titled The Destruction of Craving is Nibbana. We have a question here. Oh, yes, sir, you have a question? Yeah, if you could use the mic. You can keep that with you. You might use it throughout the class, but this way the people online will be able to hear you.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, one question that I find myself coming to pretty often is to put ourselves on a path where we're seeking serenity and peace and, as you say, like permanent happiness and permanent non-attachment. It seems to be like the ultimate craving that you could have, right? The desire to be free from suffering, the desire to be like free from craving and all the pull of emotion and anxiety and longing and all that. To be on a path to where you're trying to get, a path is leading somewhere, you're trying to get to enlightenment. That seems to be in and of itself like an attachment and a craving. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, there are some people who crave enlightenment or the peacefulness, and as long as they're doing that, they're not going to be able to experience enlightenment. You need to be able to pursue it as a goal, as an objective, as an interest, that you're gradually working towards it. It's just like, say you were on a long path, it's going to take you 8 hours to walk it, right? You could hurry up and feverishly walk that 8-hour path, and you're going to be exhausted all the way through, and it's going to feel miserable. Or you could just gradually walk through this path, enjoying the view, enjoying the wind, enjoying the scenery, and gradually work towards the goal of getting to the end of this path. So I don't think about the path to enlightenment as an end of the path. There's no finish line that you're going to cross. But if you're pursuing it as a craving, desire, attachment, which is a longing, a yearning, chasing after something, holding it really tight, there you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. You got to eliminate that craving. Some people have craving for enlightenment. But also, if you're over here on the other side where you are indifferent and you could care less whether you're angry and frustrated, you could care less how you treat other people and how they experience you in the world, you're not going to get to enlightenment there either. So the middle way that the Buddha taught is this gradual training, this gradual practice, this gradual progress that you're gradually working towards a certain goal, a certain objective. And one of the ways that you can get to that is oftentimes we talk about enlightenment as attaining enlightenment. And this is one way to talk about it. And oftentimes when you're attaining something, it's because you don't have something, you're trying to now attain it. And now you might chase after it because you don't have it, so you might chase after it. So a way to bring your mind to the middle and pursue it as a goal, objective, or interest is to think about it as your mind is already enlightened and you have these pollutions that are in your mind. And you need to get rid of these pollutions so that the qualities of the enlightened mind can shine through more and more. So if you think about it as you're already enlightened and it's nothing to attain, but the mind is already enlightened and you just got to eradicate the pollutions so you can experience more of those qualities, this can help you to get rid of the longing, yearning, and chasing after enlightenment. And this actually matches well with what you experience on the way to enlightenment, because on your way to enlightenment, you can experience a couple of minutes, a couple of hours, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, even a couple of months where your mind's very peaceful, very joyful. And then all of a sudden you'll get discontent. You'll have some discontentedness that comes in. But then when you eradicate those cravings, now the peace and the joy will start shining through again. So this definition or this idea that your mind is already enlightened and you got to get rid of the pollutions to be able to have that brightness and radiance shine through more and more, it matches to what you experience on your way to enlightenment. And then you can pursue it as a goal, objective, or interest because you already have it. There's nothing that you're attaining, but instead the mind's already got it. So that way you won't chase after it. Mm-hmm. We have a question here on Facebook from Hugo. This is actually from our previous chapter. He says, when it comes to wisdom, what is the difference between a higher self message and intuition? That the teachings talk about that. So this isn't something that the Buddha actually talks about in the way that you're describing it. You're talking about the higher self. The Buddha describes that there is no self, that the mind in the unenlightened state is going to think that there is a self. That's that personal existence view that I was describing earlier that produces shyness, that there's a self that the unenlightened mind is clinging to. Sometimes someone says, I need to find my true self, or I don't even know who I am anymore. I need to go find myself. Well, there is no self, is what the Buddha is describing, that as long as you cling to this body or this mind, thinking that this is who you are, when your self-image isn't intact, then you're going to experience discontentedness. So, for example, if you spill chocolate ice cream or pizza sauce on your clothes, you'll be embarrassed. You might be frustrated because you're not being perceived in the world a certain way. Or if you start having pimples or moles, or you start losing your hair, you get gray hair or something like this, you're not being perceived in the world a certain way, and you'll be frustrated or irritated. This is because the mind is confused and it thinks that there is a self, or the self-identity, which is that nationality, the culture, the ethnicity, the sexual orientation, the job or occupation. You can, be attached to that and clinging to that as your self-identity. So what you're describing, Hugo, isn't what the Buddha would have described. He would have described that there is no self, even though people talk about this higher self. He did describe what's called a higher mind, right? He's always talking about the mind, or this higher consciousness. That's what you're cultivating. And what wisdom is where you know the truth. And what truth is independently verifiable truth. Sometimes you hear people say, well, this is my truth, and that's your truth. No, there's no such thing as my truth and your truth. There's the truth, right? And the truth can be independently verified. That somebody can teach you something, you can then look at your own direct experiences in the world, and you can independently verify that that's true. So when we talk about craving, desire, attachment, we talk about anger, hatred, ill will, when we talk about ignorance, the delusion, the confusion, all these different pollutions, you can independently verify that it's true. And that is the truth because it's independently verifiable. And now, once you know the truth, you've acquired wisdom. And now with this wisdom, you'll make better decisions about how to train this mind and how to navigate the world around you. So that's what I would share with you on that, Hugo. Looks like we have a question here on Zoom. I can't read that very easily, so I'm going to take this mic off so I can read it. Hello, David. This is from Lucy. I have a question about fear. This emotion is not triggered by the outside, but the inner heart of ourself. Now, how can we deal with the emotion of fear? So what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're working to eliminate these symptoms. The fear isn't the actual cause of the problem. The fear is the problem. That's the symptom. The cause of that is the craving, desire, attachment. The mind wants something to be a certain way. So say, for example, something simple. Say somebody was afraid of a spider, right? And now their mind never wants to see a spider ever. That's the craving. That's the clinging. That's the permanence that the mind's looking for. The mind's trying to push away these spiders because when that painful feeling of fear arises, the mind wants to push away something. And it thinks that that's going to solve the problem. But you can't live in a world where you permanently don't see a spider. You're going to see a spider. So in this situation, an individual hasn't solved their problem by just pushing the spiders away, because it's only a matter of time before they see one, and then the fear arises and their mind is uncalm. So what you do is you develop the Eightfold Path, which is the core central teaching of the Buddha, which I'm going to be teaching here coming up in our group learning program, which is restarting tomorrow on Sunday. And I'm going to be teaching this over multiple Sundays and Wednesdays, where you're going to be learning the Eightfold Path, the core central teaching of the Buddha.
And part of that is to practice breathing mindfulness, meditation, and generosity. That's what's training your mind to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment. But then also with fears, what you would like to do is put the mind in the situation that it fears and train it that it can be peaceful and joyful. Because what the mind's going to want to do when it has a fear is it's going to want to push that thing away. Like if you're afraid of dogs, you're going to never want to see dogs. You're going to want to push that away. But what you should actually do is just the opposite, is put your mind in the situation that it fears. So with spiders, what I would advise somebody to do is look at pictures in a magazine or on the internet of spiders. And of course, this fear is going to arise, but you can cut that off and let it go, and cut it off and let it go, and cut it off and let it go. And that's why the breathing mindfulness, meditation, and generosity is there to train the mind to be able to do that. And then once you do that 2 or 3 different times, and you're noticing there's no fear whatsoever looking at spiders in a magazine or on the internet, then you would like to go to something like a museum where spiders are preserved, and they have like their little hair, they have little eyes, you can see them, but they're not alive, and you can see these things. And now the fear is going to arise, and you can cut that off and cut that off and cut that off. And then you do that a few times, and then eventually you do it and you see there's no fear. And then eventually you'd like to get to the point where you're putting the mind in the situation where there's real live spiders, and you're seeing them in their natural environment. And again, if there's any fear that arises, you cut that off, and you cut it off, and you cut it off, and eventually you get to the point where there's no fear, because you realize that you haven't caused these spiders any harm, so therefore no harm is coming back to you. This is the natural law of Gama. But again, the unenlightened mind is going to want to push that away, and it thinks that solves the problem, whether it's spiders or snakes or something like this. Nowadays, people refer to this as I think they call it or exposure therapy. That's what they call it, exposure therapy. You're desensitizing the mind to the stimulus or the object. Whatever the object is that the mind's fearing, you put the mind in that situation in order to expose it to that. And some people even fear death. And you can put your mind in that situation. You're not killing yourself, but there's actually a way to contemplate or reflect on your own death, and this will train your mind to eliminate the fear of death. So you can read Volume 1, Chapter 17. This is where I talk about fears, and I've taught classes on that. And then when you need help, you can reach out and let me know, and I will help you to understand more fully. But here, this is just a little bit of guidance to help you understand. And then there's more learning that you would need to do with the Eightfold Path. And then specifically, Volume 1, Chapter 17 will teach you what I just shared with you. So thank you guys for your questions. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions here. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 123. Is there someone who would like to read this? You're welcome, Hugo. I see your thank you there. You're welcome. You got it, Koshi? Okay. If it's cold in here, by the way, guys, we have remote controls over there on the bookshelf. You guys can adjust the temperature. We just had our air conditioners cleaned, so they work really, really well when you clean them. So I'm kind of trying to adjust it here. If you feel a little bit chilly, feel free to help yourself to adjust it. Go ahead.
Directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment. Master Gautama, it is said, directly visible Nibbana, directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment. In what way is Nibbana directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise? Brahmin, one excited by craving, overcome by craving, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both. And he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when craving is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that the Nibbana enlightenment is directly visible. One full of anger, overcome by anger, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, and the harm of both, and he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when anger is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that the Nibbana is directly visible. One who is wise, overcome by ignorance, one who is unwise, overcome by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when ignorance, unknowing of true reality, is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that Nibbana is directly visible. When Brahman, one experiences the reminderless destruction of craving, the reminderless destruction of anger, and the reminderless destruction of ignorance, unknowing of true reality, it is in this way, too, that the Nibbana is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise.
Okay, thank you, Kushi. So here the Buddha is just going into more detail about Nibbana or enlightenment. How to attain Nibbana or enlightenment is to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. So I've already described that in our previous chapters, but one of the things I would like to point out here, which is something very unique that you'll see in the teachings of the Buddha, where is it at? I know it was down here, but it was actually in all of them. So here, where the Buddha is describing the elimination of all these things, he says that Nibbana is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see. This is very unique in the teachings of the Buddha, where he's like, come and see my teachings, come investigate them, come examine them. Because for a person who's a Buddha, they know that they've attained enlightenment. Their mind is peaceful, it's calm, it's serene, it's content with joy. They don't experience any more anger. They don't experience any more sadness or frustration or any of these discontent feelings. And they did it by themselves. They figured out how to do it. So they know that their teachings indeed lead to enlightenment. So they're going to say, yeah, come investigate my teachings, come examine them. Because they know if you examine them close enough, you'll figure it out. You'll be able to see that they lead to enlightenment. So sometimes we might be shy about our work. Like if you put together like a work project or you go to present it somewhere in a business environment, you might be shy, you might be lacking confidence, you might be a little bit hindered from being able to stand up in front of an audience because you're not quite confident about the material that you're presenting. But a Buddha, they have confidence without arrogance, without pride, without boastfulness. They have confidence in their teachings. So they know if somebody comes and examines their teachings and investigates them, you'll be able to see the truth in them if you penetrate them close enough. So you'll see the Buddha talk about this in other places where he invites people to come see and come investigate his teachings. It's like, come on, come take a look. If you come take a look, you'll be able to see that they lead to enlightenment. So I thought I'd point that out. But this is referring to craving, anger, and ignorance, which we talked about previously. So do you guys have any questions here? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. And you're welcome, Lucy. Pleased to help you with your question there. All right, let's move to the next one, which is chapter 124. Is there someone who would like to read this? Yes, ma'am.
Me? Yes, perfect. Directly visible Nibbana spoken by the perfectly enlightened one, shared by the Venerable Ananda. It is said, friend, directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment, directly visible Nibbana. In what way has the perfectly enlightened one spoken of directly visible Nibbana? Here, friend, distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental state, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. To this extent, too, the perfectly enlightened one has spoken of directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment, in a provisional, temporary sense. In reference to the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, the base of the infinite space, the base of the infinite of consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, identical aspects correlating to the first jhana were spoken. Also, the state of directly visible Nibbana is provisionally, temporarily revealed. The elimination of perception and feeling, as is the destruction of the taints, is not provisionally permanent, explained to be directly visible Nibbana, as in the following passages. Again, friend, by completely overcoming the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a monk enters and resides in the elimination of perception and feeling, and having seen with wisdom, his taints, fetters, are completely destroyed. To this extent, friend, the perfectly enlightened one has spoken of directly visible Nibbana in a non-provisional permanent sense.
Okay, thank you very much. So here, what the Buddha is describing is, first he's starting to talk about these jhanas. These jhanas are preliminary phases that the mind experiences on its way to enlightenment. There are certain heightened qualities that you experience. And the Buddha describes it in other teachings. He explains to you what your mind's going to experience. If you're practicing the teachings, you'll see that your mind's moving through these jhanas. There are certain qualities that he describes. And this is where it starts getting really real for you, is that you see that there's this individual who lived over 2,500 years ago. He describes something that, hey, if you practice these teachings, you're going to experience these things. And when you start experiencing those things, it's like, whoa, here's somebody that spoke 2,500 years ago, and I did what he taught, and now I'm experiencing these things in the qualities of your mind. So you can start having kind of an indication that your mind is moving closer to enlightenment as your mind experiences these first, second, third, and fourth jhana. And then he's referencing these other attainments, which are other attainments that some people experience on their way to enlightenment. Well, he's describing that these jhanas are temporary. They're not permanent. The jhanas, in terms of making your way to enlightenment, if you got complacent when you were in the jhanas, your mind could regress and it would go backwards. But if you continue to stay dedicated, determined, and diligent, your mind will just continue to progress through the jhanas into the first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment. And then from there, the qualities of the jhanas are going to be permanent now, because now your mind getting to enlightenment, once it's in the fourth stage of enlightenment, that's a permanent place for the mind to reside. And that's what the Buddha is describing here, that Nibbana is not provisional, that it's permanent, that it's not temporary. Enlightenment is permanent. It's a permanent state. And the reason why is because you've trained your mind to get to this unconditioned mental quality, that in the unenlightened state, your mind has certain conditions. The conditions are craving, anger, and ignorance. More specifically, the 10 fetters. These conditions are causing conditional feelings, that the happiness, excitement, elation, it arises, it changes, and it fades away. The sadness, the anger, the frustration, and all these other discontent feelings, it arises, changes, and fades away because it's based on some condition. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you've purified your mind of all those conditions. So therefore, the mind is now in this permanent peace, this permanent joy. So any questions on this chapter? Yes, ma'am.
So when Buddha is saying like distant from sense desires and distant from unwholesome mental states, and for residing in first jhana, then a person needs to like get away from all the sense desires with all the 5 sense bases, or it's just need to be reduced to a certain point.
So to get to that first jhana, what you're doing is you're putting together the Eightfold Path. And as part of that, you will have distanced yourself from sensual desires, meaning you've stepped away from them. You haven't fully eliminated them yet, but you've distanced yourself. When we say distance yourself, meaning distance yourself from the object, because there's two steps involved in eliminating a craving, desire, attachment. First, it's distancing yourself from the object, then it's training your mind to let it go. So say, for example, you were a smoker. If you smoked cigarettes, the first step to eliminating this craving is to get rid of cigarettes in your life so you don't have them. So you've distanced yourself, in that case, from the object. You've distanced yourself from the sense desire, but you haven't eliminated the craving yet, because inside the mind, for the next 2 months, the next 3 months, the next 6 months, every once in a while the mind's like, I really wish I had a cigarette. I really want a cigarette. You've distanced yourself from the sense desire, but the desire is still in the mind. It hasn't yet been eliminated yet. So the first jhana, you've just distanced yourself from, a certain amount of sensual desires, but you still have sensual desire in your mind. You've just distanced yourself from the object. And then the same thing with the unwholesome mental states is that you still have unwholesomeness in your mind when you're in the jhanas, but you've just distanced yourself from it, that you aren't as angry, you aren't as frustrated, you aren't as bitter and harsh, you're not experiencing the significant strong feelings as you once did. Your discontentedness has been reduced to a certain degree. By the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, it's significantly reduced. It's just a fraction of what it once was. But even in the jhanas, you experience less discontentedness because you've maybe cleaned up a certain part of your practice, right? Like maybe before you were smoking and now you've chose not to smoke, or maybe you were drinking alcohol and maybe now you've chose not to do those things. So certain unwholesome things that you were doing in the past, you've now cleaned that up to a certain degree. But in the jhanas, you're still doing some things that are unwholesome. You haven't cleaned up everything yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Oops. I accidentally closed the book. Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the next one here. I don't see any questions anywhere. This is 125. Is there someone who would like to read this? And those of you guys that are in Zoom, you guys are welcome to volunteer to read as well. Just need to electronically raise your hand. Go for it.
Nibbana in this very life, enlightenment. There are householder forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, his consciousness does not become dependent upon them or cling to them. A monk without clinging attains Nibbana, enlightenment. There are householder sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind, that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, his consciousness does not become dependent upon them or cling to them. A monk without clinging attains Nibbana, enlightenment. This is the cause and reason, householder, why some beings here attain Nibbana in this very life. Monk, if through fading away of strong feelings towards the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. Through its fading away and elimination, one is liberated by non-clinging. One can be called a monk who has attained Nibbana, enlightenment, in this very life.
Okay, thank you, Kushi. So here what the Buddha is talking about is he's talking about what's called central desire. This is one of the fetters in the mind. This is the longing and the yearning. When we talk about craving, desire, attachment, this is the main thing that the Buddha is talking about. This is where the mind longs and yearns through the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Remember, the Buddha is not explaining the way the world should be. He's explaining to you the way the world is. And one of the ways for you to get to peace and joy is to understand this being, who you are now. And what you can understand is that in the unenlightened mind, there's central desire, where the mind wants things to be permanently pleasing, permanently agreeable. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. This centrally enticing, this tempting, that the mind wants things to be permanently comfortable, and it's just not possible. So you live in this impermanent world, so you're going to need to train your mind to be comfortable with impermanence. Whereas if you have craving to see things through the eyes that are permanently agreeable to you, you'll get pleasant feelings when you see things that are agreeable to you. But when you see things that are disagreeable, then you'll feel painful feelings. So if you're walking down the street and you see a mother and a child that are holding hands, you might be like, this is so heartwarming. Look at that. The little child is holding their mom's hand. That's so lovely. I really like that. And you might get like all these pleasant feelings. These are conditional pleasant feelings because you're seeing something through the eyes that is agreeable. But now you turn the corner and you see a parent slap their child across the face. Whoa, right? Like, we're not talking about the way the world should be. We're talking about the way the world is. That some parents might do that, right? It's unfortunate, it's unwise, but that's something that you might see at some point. So this is impermanence, that not every parent treats their child with love and kindness and warmth. So if you see that to be disagreeable and your mind thinks that's disagreeable, you'll get angry, you'll get frustrated in that situation. And it's because of your cravings. Here's another one that's maybe a little bit more simple for you to understand and think about, is that say you were at a stoplight in a car and somebody pulls up next to you with music on that you find that is pretty pleasing to you, sensually enticing. You might start dancing around in your seat, feeling all great that you hear this music. And now your mind gets these pleasant feelings. You get excited, right? Because of this music next to you in this other car. But then when you pull up to the next traffic light, another car pulls up next to you and they have music that you don't like, that you find to be horrible. And now you're frustrated, you're agitated, because the mind is longing through the ears to hear a sound that is permanently agreeable. When you hear music that you agree with, you get happy, you get excited. But then when you hear music you don't agree with, you get frustrated or irritated or annoyed. This is all coming from central desire. So this is what the Buddha is describing here, and he describes it in other teachings as well, is that it's this longing, yearning through these sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, the mind. This is what we call the 6 sense bases. This is contact that the mind is experiencing through the sense bases. We also refer to these as the doorways to discontentedness. Anytime your mind is discontent, it's going to be coming through one of these doorways. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, or the mind itself. The mind itself is where you're like thinking about something from the past that was either pleasurable or painful. And now in the present moment, you're experiencing pleasure or pain based on something you're thinking about from the past. And the same thing can be true about the future. You could be longing and yearning for something in the future, and now you're experiencing pleasant feelings or painful feelings based on something in the future. So you can train your mind to not do this, that you can pursue things as a goal, objective, or interest, that you understand that, yeah, sometimes the temperature in the room is going to be just fine. Other times it's going to be a little bit cool. I feel a little bit chilly. I mean, I got my hair cut this week and, I feel a little bit of coolness and I'm trying to adjust it, but it's just not working. But you don't have to get irritated or frustrated, right? Sometimes you're going to be at home and everything's going to be just right in terms of the sound. Other times you're going to hear a baby crying next door, right? Or you're going to hear a car crash, or you're going to hear some music that you particularly don't care for. So if your mind's craving for permanent contact through these sense spaces to be agreeable, well, when you hear something, when you smell something, when you taste something, any of these other sense bases, when you experience something that's disagreeable, you'll be frustrated or irritated or annoyed. So you can eliminate your central desire, your longing and yearning, your wanting things to be a certain way, and then you can be peaceful and joyful no matter what. Sometimes I teach, it's like this, it's fairly quiet and I can teach. Other times there's a worker outside with a saw, like, right? Where if I was craving for the sound in the temple to be a certain sound, then I could only be happy when it's that way. And when the saw is out there and people can barely hear me sometimes, then it would be, the mind would be discontent. The mind would be frustrated or irritated or annoyed. So you can understand that all these things are impermanent. Sometimes there's going to be certain sounds, sometimes they're not. Do you guys have any questions on this? This is the Buddha describing getting to enlightenment is to eliminate central desire from the mind, the longing, the yearning, wanting things to be permanently agreeable through the sense bases. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and end class here. Sometimes what we do is we go through all 10 chapters. We study all the way up to 130 in this case, because it would be 121 to 130. But what I'm going to do is just stop here, because we usually stop right around 11 o'clock. It's almost that time. So we've studied 5 chapters. There's another 5 here. I teach this same class online at nighttime from my home, and I make sure that I go through all 10 chapters. But sometimes here at the temple, I just go through certain chapters. So if you guys would like to learn the additional chapters, you can read them in the book. If you go to buddhadailywisdom.com, you can download this book, or you can get them here or on Amazon, and you can study them, and you can always ask me questions about them. But a lot of these chapters today are in this similar type of content, with craving, anger, and ignorance, and talking about nibbana. And I think that we've talked about it enough here for you guys. So if you'd like to learn the foundational teachings of the Buddha, tomorrow's class would be really well suited, because we're going to be starting from the very beginning of the group learning program at Sunday at 9 a.m. And then I also do it from home at 9 p.m. And if you're not here in Chiang Mai, you can tune in through our live stream on YouTube or Facebook, or you can come in through Zoom. And then the class is even recorded, so you can listen to it on our podcast or on the YouTube or on Facebook even after the live class. So sometimes students learn that way at their own pace as well. So as you guys have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm here to help you guys. Perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes, courses, or retreats. We'll see you next time. Sawadee krap. Sawadee krap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.